The unexpected summons. Jason Miller was deep in concentration, his hands deftly adjusting the intricate components of the propulsion system on his workbench. The soft hum of machinery filled the air, a rhythm that had become second nature. He was so absorbed in his task that the sudden flicker of light above him barely registered, until it intensified, casting sharp blue shadows across the cluttered lab. A holographic notification burst into existence, floating right above his head. His pulse quickened as he glanced at it. The familiar Galactic Federation emblem was clearly visible at the top, but what followed was anything but ordinary. His heart dropped. "Congratulations," the message began, and Jason almost laughed at the absurdity of it. He had heard of people being drafted for government service before, but this was something else. His eyes scanned further. "You have been selected for the mandatory Alien Brides program. Your genetic profile has been matched with a Federation citizen. Reporting for processing is required within 48 hours. Jason froze, his hands shaking. Tools forgotten. No, this can't be real," he muttered, reading the words over and over again, as if hoping the message would change. His thoughts scrambled, trying to make sense of it. The Alien Alliance had always been a distant concept, an intergalactic exchange program, some cultural experiment where humans were meant to learn about other species, explore new worlds, and maybe even engage in friendly diplomatic relationships. He had thought of it as a passing phase, a problem that would be solved by the diplomats, the politicians, the ones who dealt with things like this. But now, here he was, personally drafted into something he couldn't even begin to understand. His stomach twisted. His mind raced. An arranged marriage with an alien. The notification shifted, and a new line appeared. No grounds for appeal. Selection is final and binding under Earth Federation Treaty Article 7. Jason cursed under his breath. His hands balled into fists, and he stood up so abruptly that his chair scraped loudly against the metal floor. He paced back and forth in the lab, feeling the walls close in around him. "I'm an engineer," he shouted at the empty room. "I build things. I don't." His voice faltered. He had no idea what he was about to be dragged into. How had this even happened? A few months ago, humanity had barely made first contact with the Federation. Now he was about to be matched with an alien for marriage as part of some interspecies exchange. It was madness. A soft knock echoed from the door, pulling him out of his spiraling thoughts. He turned to see Dr. Chen, his supervisor, stepping into the room. The older man's expression was unreadable, but Jason saw the flicker of sympathy in his eyes. "I heard you cursing," Dr. Chen said quietly. "Bad news." Jason shook his head, still too stunned to speak. Instead, he gestured toward the hovering notification. "I've been selected for the Brides program," Jason muttered, barely able to believe the words coming out of his mouth. Dr. Chen's face shifted from concern to something more neutral, a well-practiced mask. "Well, congratulations." Jason glared at him. "Congratulations. Do you hear yourself? I'm about to be married to some alien I've never even met. And for what? Some treaty." Dr. Chen sighed deeply, the weight of the situation settling on his shoulders. "It's complicated, Jason. The Federation is keeping us safe from 3 different hostile species. Our participation in their cultural program is a requirement. We can't afford to refuse them." Jason's heart sank. He knew Dr. Chen was right. He'd heard the rumors. The Federation was powerful, its technology far beyond anything Earth had, and refusing to comply with their treaties could have disastrous consequences. But still, the idea of being married off to something he didn't know felt wrong, almost like a violation. Jason's eyes flicked back to the message, but the notification was already fading. It had no answers, only an ultimatum. "We have 48 hours, he whispered to himself. 48 hours until my life changes forever. A marriage of duty. Jason barely slept that night. The incessant hum of the lab's cooling systems, the low buzz of nearby equipment. It all felt like an oppressive weight. His mind kept circling back to the same horrifying thought. He was being forced into a marriage with an alien. Not just any alien, but someone chosen for him by a cold, calculating system. The worst part, he had no choice in the matter. By morning, his mind was racing. The Federation's message, the finality of it, echoed through his thoughts like a broken record. There was no escape, no way out. The clock was ticking down, and in less than 48 hours, he would be whisked away to meet his bride-to-be, his alien bride. The briefing documents, full of endless cultural protocols and explanations about the Federation's diplomatic strategies, were scattered across the workbench, ignored. Jason had spent the better part of the morning trying to process the information, but the more he read, the more overwhelming it became. Terms like genetic compatibility, interspecies diplomacy, and post-marriage customs seemed to blend together into an incomprehensible blur. His phone buzzed, pulling him from his thoughts. It was a text from Dr. Chen. "Meet me in the briefing room. We need to prepare you." Jason groaned and rubbed his eyes. Prepare for what? A wedding? This wasn't some diplomatic mission. This was real. This was his life, and he couldn't shake the gnawing feeling in the pit of his stomach. He had never been one to give up, but this felt like something he couldn't fight. When Jason arrived at the briefing room, he found Dr. Chen already waiting, a solemn expression etched on his face. "Sit down," Dr. Chen said, gesturing to the chair across from him. "I know this is a lot to take in." Jason sank into the chair, feeling the weight of the conversation ahead. He looked at the table where a tablet was waiting. More Federation documents, more of the same. He had barely touched the last batch. "I don't get it," Jason began, his voice tight. "Why me? Why was I chosen? I'm just an engineer. I'm not some diplomat or whatever it is they want." Dr. Chen sighed, looking at him with a mixture of pity and understanding. "It's not about your diplomatic skills, Jason. It's about your mind. The Federation values innovation. You've been working on propulsion systems, quantum field manipulation. They see you as a visionary. They've matched you with someone who shares that vision. This isn't about just marrying an alien. It's about forging a partnership." "A partnership," Jason repeated, incredulous. "I'm supposed to marry someone I've never met, and suddenly we're partners." "Not suddenly. The Federation's been running this program for a long time. They've seen what human creativity can do, and they believe it's the key to bridging the gap between species. This marriage, it's meant to spark something bigger, for both of you." Jason's mind raced. Was that really possible? A partnership with someone? Something from another world? "You're the best in your field," Dr. Chen continued, "and you're going to be part of something bigger than yourself. The Federation believes that by combining your genius with theirs, we can learn, grow, and perhaps even find a way to negotiate peace with the hostile factions that threaten us." Jason leaned back in his chair, processing the gravity of the situation. A partnership, huh? He had always thought of himself as an inventor, a creator, someone who could solve problems. But this was a whole new kind of challenge. The door slid open, and a human liaison entered, cutting through his thoughts. "Mr. Miller, it's time," the liaison said, her voice calm but firm. "The transport to the processing center is ready. Your match is waiting." Jason's heart skipped a beat. It was happening. He stood up, almost mechanically, and followed the liaison out of the room. The air felt thick with tension as they walked down the long hallway. He could feel the weight of the entire situation pressing down on him, but there was no going back now. The processing center loomed ahead, a towering structure that blended both alien elegance and human pragmatism. The design was unlike anything Jason had seen before, organic curves meshing seamlessly with crystalline precision. It was a marvel of architecture, but it didn't ease the nervousness that coiled in his gut. As he walked through the massive doors, He was met by a Federation representative, a tall figure with greenish skin, whose dark eyes studied him with the same detached curiosity that the rest of the Federation seemed to view Earth's people. They led him into a waiting room, a sterile yet oddly comfortable space, where Jason's stomach churned with anticipation. "You'll meet her soon," the representative said, his voice devoid of any emotion. "Please try to remain calm. This is a crucial moment in your life." Jason nodded absently, his thoughts still whirling. What would she be like? Would she look like him? Would they even understand each other? He hadn't been briefed on any of that. The data was vague, offering only a few short details about his future bride. Her name, her species, and her role as a diplomatic representative. The door opened, and there she was. First impressions. The moment the door opened, Jason felt his breath catch in his chest. Standing in front of him was an alien unlike anything he had imagined, yet somehow exactly what he expected. Her figure was tall, graceful, almost ethereal. Her skin shimmered a deep, radiant blue, and the faint glow beneath it reminded him of the bioluminescent creatures that glowed in the depths of Earth's oceans. Her hair, long and flowing, was like silver strands of moonlight, cascading down her back in soft waves. But it was her eyes that captured his attention, large, reflective, and a striking mix of silver and violet, as though they held the entire universe within them. For a moment, neither of them moved. Jason's mind struggled to catch up with what his eyes were telling him. His instincts screamed to run, to flee from this alien encounter, from the whole mess he had found himself in. But his legs refused to obey. Her lips parted, and a soft, melodious voice broke the silence. "Jason Miller," she said, her tone warm and unexpectedly kind. "It's a pleasure to finally meet you." Her accent was strange, yet somehow soothing. It was not the mechanical, cold tones Jason had expected from an alien, but something soft, with a hint of familiarity that caught him off guard. He couldn't help but feel a little embarrassed at how long it took him to find his voice. Yeah, he stammered. "Nice to meet you too." He cursed himself inwardly. Smooth, Jason. Real smooth. She stepped forward, and for a moment, Jason instinctively stepped back. Her presence was commanding, yet there was something about her that disarmed him, made him feel small in a way he wasn't used to. She seemed to notice his discomfort and smiled, though the smile was subtle, a slight curve at the corners of her lips. "I know this must be overwhelming," she said, as she came to a stop a few feet away from him. "But I promise you, I'm not here to make this difficult." Jason nodded slowly, his mind still racing. "It's just all of this. I'm not prepared for any of it." Rima. He remembered her name now, tilted her head slightly. "You've been chosen for this program not because of your ability to prepare, Jason, but because of your mind. The Federation values what you are capable of, what humans are capable of. I am not your enemy, nor your captor. I am here to help us both navigate this strange new path." Jason could feel his heart rate slowly returning to normal. She spoke with such certainty, such grace. It was disorienting. It wasn't what he expected from a diplomat or a bride. He had assumed that he would be thrown into this situation with someone who only saw him as a means to an end. But Rima seemed different. You chose me?" he asked, finally finding the courage to ask the question that had been haunting him since the first message appeared. Her eyes softened, and she nodded. "Yes. When I learned I was to be part of this program, I was given the opportunity to choose. I could have chosen any human, but I researched your work, your innovations in propulsion systems, your theories about quantum field manipulation. Your mind fascinated me." Jason blinked, stunned. "You read my papers?" She smiled again, and this time it was a full, genuine smile. "Of course. Your work is extraordinary. You humans, you achieve the impossible simply because no one has told you it cannot be done. You break boundaries in ways that no one else has even imagined." Jason, still processing her words, shook his head. I didn't know I was so important. To you, I mean. It's not about importance, Jason, Rima replied, her tone thoughtful. It's about potential. The Federation believes that through this program, we can bridge the gap between our species. And that begins with us. You and me. Jason swallowed, the weight of her words pressing down on him. He had assumed that he was just another cog in the machine, another human being shuffled into this program because of some bureaucratic decision. But now, standing before him, was someone who had chosen him, not because of some treaty or obligation, but because she believed in what humanity could achieve. He still didn't know how to feel about this whole situation, but a part of him, something deep down, felt a flicker of hope. Unlikely alliances. The chamber where the bonding ceremony would take place was unlike any room Jason had ever seen. Sleek, polished surfaces gleamed in the soft light. The room bathed in a calming blue glow. It felt strangely intimate, despite its size. A vast table stretched before them, surrounded by comfortable-looking chairs. At the center of the table was an odd pulsating device, alien in design, with intricate symbols Jason couldn't quite decipher. Rima had led him into the room, her posture elegant but unhurried. As she stepped forward, the ambient light seemed to shimmer around her, almost as if the very air itself was responding to her presence. Jason followed, his heart thumping in his chest. "I know you may have many questions," Rima said as she moved to sit at one end of the table, her movements graceful. "But right now, we must take this step. There is no going back." Jason looked around the room, trying to steady his nerves. His mind raced as he thought about the ceremony, the bond they were about to form, an unbreakable connection, as the Federation had described it. This wasn't just about them anymore. It was about the future of humanity, and the future of their relationship. The stakes were high, and Jason wasn't sure he was prepared for what was about to unfold. But one thing was certain. Rima was different. She wasn't just following protocol. She was invested, deeply, in whatever this partnership was supposed to be. Jason could see it in the way she looked at him, not as a tool, not as a burden, but as someone who had the potential to shape something extraordinary. And maybe, just maybe, she believed that he could be more than just an engineer. "Jason," Rima's voice broke through his thoughts, soft but insistent. "Before we begin, I need to understand something. You seem reluctant, perhaps even fearful. But you must know, this is not a cage. This is a partnership, a mutual understanding between us, between our species. What I'm asking you is this: are you willing to try, to see where this journey can take us?" Jason stared at her for a long moment. He could hear the sincerity in her words, the underlying plea that was almost too subtle to detect. Was he willing? What choice did he have? "I don't know," Jason admitted, his voice low. "I've never been good at trust or partnerships. I'm used to working alone. My whole life has been about building things on my own, solving problems by myself." He swallowed hard, feeling the weight of his vulnerability. "But this is different. I don't know if I'm ready to trust someone, especially not someone I've just met." Rima nodded slowly, her gaze never leaving his. "I understand, but that's why we're here, to build something together. And maybe, if we are both willing to take this step, we can find something greater than either of us could achieve alone." Jason's heart beat faster as the words sank in. He had been building engines, crafting theories, creating solutions for years, but this was something he had never prepared for: a relationship with an alien. A true partnership, one where both sides had to contribute, compromise, and grow. "Trust isn't built in a day," Rima continued, "but it starts with one small step, one decision. And that decision is yours. Will you try? Will you take that first step with me? The ceremony begins." Jason nodded, though the uncertainty still gnawed at him. He wasn't sure if he was ready, but the words of the Federation echoed in his mind. "This is bigger than you. This is bigger than Earth." Rima stood up and motioned for Jason to do the same. "Now we begin." The bonding ritual will link us, not just physically, but mentally. It is a way for us to share thoughts, intentions, even fears. It will allow us to understand each other in a way that words cannot. Jason hesitated. And if I don't want that kind of connection? Rima's eyes softened. You don't have to do anything you don't want to. This is your choice, Jason. But remember, the Federation has made it clear. If we are to work together, we must understand one another completely. Jason took a deep breath and slowly stood. He had spent his entire life creating connections between complex systems, engines, machines, computers. But this was different. This was human and alien, mind and soul. Could he truly connect with someone like this? Would it be too much? Too alien? Before he could answer, the liaison stepped forward, holding out a device that resembled a strange medallion. This is a bonding link, she explained, her voice low and businesslike. Once activated, it will merge your consciousness with that of your partner. You will be able to share thoughts, emotions, and memories. It will be a bridge between your two minds. Jason took the medallion in his hand, feeling its cool alien texture. It pulsed faintly, like it was alive. His fingers tingled as they brushed over its surface. It was beautiful, complicated, and mysterious, like the entire program itself. I'm ready, he said, though he wasn't entirely sure he was. Rima held out her hand once more, her expression serene but filled with an underlying intensity. Then let us begin. As Jason placed the medallion into her outstretched hand, something strange happened. A pulse of energy surged through the room, and Jason's mind seemed to clear, as if a fog was being lifted. He could hear Rima's breathing, steady and calm, but then he could hear more. He could hear the beat of her heart, the quiet hum of her thoughts, as though they were suddenly laid bare before him. His vision blurred, and for a brief, terrifying moment, he thought he might lose himself entirely. But then, slowly, the sensation faded, and his mind stabilized. He was still him, and she was still her. But something had changed. He could feel it. He could feel her thoughts, not just in words, but in a strange, deep way. There was no doubt now. The bond was real. The heart of the bond. Jason awoke with a jolt, his mind disoriented. The room around him was dimly lit, and for a moment, he couldn't remember where he was. His fingers brushed against the smooth surface of the table in front of him. Then he remembered. The bonding ceremony. Rima. The medallion. It wasn't a dream. His heart skipped a beat. The bond was still there. Even now, as he sat in the dim light of the ceremony room, he could feel it, like an invisible thread tying him to Rima. At first, it had been a whisper in his mind. Now it was a presence, constant but not overwhelming, like a second heartbeat in his chest. Rima was sitting across from him, her face relaxed but focused. Her gaze met his, and he saw a flicker of something in her eyes. Something new. Something they both shared. I didn't think it would be like this, Jason said, his voice hoarse, as if waking from a dream he hadn't fully understood. Rima smiled softly, almost as if she had been expecting this reaction. You mean the bond, the connection between us? She tilted her head, her silvery eyes studying him carefully. Yes, it's more intense than I anticipated as well. Jason reached up to rub his temples, trying to shake off the dizziness. It wasn't physical, it was mental. His thoughts were tangled with hers, like two parallel currents flowing together. It wasn't just their words anymore. It was a constant undercurrent of emotions, intentions, and fleeting thoughts. Sometimes, it felt like they were in sync, and other times, it felt like he was suffocating in her presence. Rima's voice, soft but clear, echoed in his mind once more. You're struggling. Are you afraid of what this means? Jason didn't answer immediately. He looked at her, his eyes searching her face for any sign of mockery or judgment. There was none. She wasn't teasing him. She wasn't trying to manipulate him. She was, in a strange way, giving him space. Finally, he answered, though it was more of a statement than a question. I don't know if I'm ready for this, Rima. This bond. It's not just between us. It's between our entire species. It's like we've become something bigger than we are individually. Rima nodded slowly, her expression thoughtful. Yes, that's the purpose of the bond. The Federation designed it not just to unite us as partners, but to unite our worlds. You and I, Jason, we are part of something that goes beyond us. We represent humanity and the Federation. Our minds, our hearts, and our wills are interconnected now, and we have a responsibility to each other, to our species. The weight of her words hung heavily in the air. Jason shifted in his seat, feeling the full force of the reality they were both facing. This wasn't just a marriage of convenience, or even a diplomatic arrangement. This was a union of minds, an alliance forged through the deepest possible connection. The bond was a thread that tied them together, linking their destinies in ways Jason couldn't yet comprehend. But then, something unexpected happened. As Rima spoke, Jason felt a surge of emotion, not his own, but hers. It wasn't a thought, or a simple feeling. It was a raw, unfiltered sense of hope. Rima's hope. The realization hit him like a lightning bolt. It wasn't just about their species anymore. It was about them. Two individuals, navigating the uncertainty of a world they could not control. But what they could control, what they had control over, was their willingness to fight for something better. Rima leaned forward, her eyes never leaving his. Jason, I'm not asking for your blind obedience. I'm asking for your partnership, not just in this program, but in this world we're building together. For humanity, for the Federation. You and I, we can make this work, but only if we choose to trust each other. Her voice was firm, but underneath it, there was a vulnerability that Jason hadn't noticed before. She was taking a risk too. She was placing her faith in him, just as he was slowly learning to place his trust in her. Jason exhaled slowly. His mind, still reeling from the intensity of the bond, started to clear. He could feel Rima's emotions like they were his own, raw, genuine, and undeniably human. And it was in that moment that he realized something profound. He didn't have to do this alone. They didn't have to do this alone. There was a possibility here, a chance to change the future of their worlds, not just for the Federation or for Earth, but for themselves. If they could navigate this bond, this strange, powerful connection, maybe they could bridge the divide between their species. Maybe they could bring humanity into the fold of a universe that had once seemed vast and unreachable. Jason looked at Rima, his thoughts aligning with hers in ways he couldn't explain. Okay, he said, his voice steady now. Let's make this work. Let's see where this can take us. Rima's smile widened, her silver eyes alight with something akin to relief. I knew you'd say that. The first test of trust. The room seemed to shift around them as the first phase of their bond was officially completed. Jason felt it then. The pulse of connection, like a steady hum between their minds. It was both exhilarating and disorienting, as if they had suddenly been thrust into a new reality, one that neither of them had expected. Are you ready? Rima asked, her voice soft, but carrying the weight of 1,000 possibilities. The first test will be tomorrow. The Federation is waiting for us to report the success of our initial bonding. It will be a public affair. Jason nodded, though the gravity of what they were about to face weighed heavily on his shoulders. I'll be ready, he said, though he wasn't entirely sure what ready even meant in this context. But Rima's gaze reassured him. She was ready. And for the first time since he had received that holographic message, Jason wasn't completely alone. Crossing the threshold, the Federation's Grand Hall was filled with an energy that was almost palpable, a tension that buzzed in the air like static electricity. Jason stood beside Rima, both of them dressed in the formal attire mandated for their status, human representative and Federation partner. The large screen in front of them flickered to life, displaying the faces of key representatives from both Earth and the Federation. Their gaze was unwavering, a mixture of curiosity and scrutiny that made the hairs on Jason's neck stand on end. He swallowed hard, suddenly aware of how out of place he felt. Just a few months ago, he had been an engineer, an unknown face in a crowded field of experts. Now, here he was, standing as one of Earth's most visible figures, tied irrevocably to an alien species through a bond that neither of them fully understood. The weight of it was heavy, but oddly, Jason wasn't afraid. He glanced at Rima, her cool composure in stark contrast to his own nervous energy. She stood with her back straight, her head high, her silver eyes fixed forward. If she felt even a fraction of the pressure he did, she didn't show it. Instead, there was a quiet confidence about her, a belief in their shared mission that seemed to radiate from her very being. The meeting began without fanfare. A Federation representative appeared on the screen, his deep voice booming in the quiet room. Jason Miller and Rima. As we embark on this monumental step for both our species, your bond will serve as the symbol of our shared future. Humanity's role in the Federation has always been uncertain. Your union is the first of its kind, and your actions will determine not only the future of Earth, but also how our two civilizations will coexist. Jason felt his throat tighten. The weight of the words settled over him like a blanket, and for a fleeting moment, he considered the enormity of the task ahead. But then he glanced at Rima again. She was still calm, still steady. She trusted him. Do you understand the gravity of this responsibility? The Federation official continued, his tone somber. The expectations are high, and the Federation Council will be closely monitoring your progress. There will be no room for failure. Jason's mind raced. There was no option for failure, was there? No retreat, no backing out. He and Rima were already entwined, whether they liked it or not. They had to move forward. They would move forward. Jason nodded, more to himself than to the screen in front of him. Understood, he replied, his voice firm despite the surge of adrenaline. Rima gave him a small, almost imperceptible smile, and Jason felt the familiar warmth of their connection, as if she were silently encouraging him. He wasn't sure what it meant to be ready for something like this, but he knew he had to try. For them. For Earth. For the future. The unexpected challenge. After the meeting concluded, Jason and Rima were led down a series of hallways, the cold, metallic walls humming softly as they walked. Jason's thoughts were still spinning from the heavy words of the Federation's representatives. The expectations were high, but there was a part of him that was more certain now than he had ever been. If this was the path forward, then they had to walk it together. But just as Jason was beginning to gather his thoughts, a loud, sharp chime echoed through the hallway, interrupting the moment. Before either of them could react, a Federation officer stepped out from a side room. Jason Miller. Rima. The officer said, his voice clipped. There has been a change in the schedule. You are both to participate in an immediate testing simulation to assess your compatibility as a team. Please follow me. Jason and Rima exchanged a brief glance. No warning. No preparation. This was the Federation way. Decisions made quickly, actions taken without hesitation. It was both exhilarating and terrifying. Rima nodded silently, and they followed the officer through the labyrinth of corridors. Jason's mind raced. Testing simulation. What kind of test would they throw at them now? The officer led them into a large chamber that resembled a high-tech arena. Bright lights flickered on overhead, and an array of devices and equipment lined the perimeter of the room. At the center was a raised platform, where a series of holographic panels hovered mid-air, awaiting their command. This simulation is designed to test the depth of your bond and your ability to act as a unified pair under pressure, the officer explained, his voice devoid of emotion. You will face multiple challenges. Work together. Trust each other. You will have no other choice. Jason's heart raced. Trust each other. Under pressure. He had barely begun to comprehend what this bond meant in everyday life, let alone in a high-stakes simulation. The platform before them hummed to life as the officer stepped back. A soft voice echoed through the room, speaking in a language Jason didn't understand. Rima's face remained impassive, but he could see the subtle tension in her posture. The bond between them was active now, alive with questions and uncertainties. Jason reached out mentally, trying to gauge her emotions. "What are we facing? What should I do?" Her answer was calm but precise, her voice in his mind. "We don't know yet. Be ready for anything." The first test materialized in an instant. A glowing orb appeared in the center of the room, pulsing with a soft light. Around the orb, a series of obstacles, holographic projections, began to materialize, moving and shifting as if alive. Jason's heart skipped a beat. He didn't know what this was, but he could feel the connection between him and Rima, pulsing through his very being. There was no time for hesitation. "Follow my lead." Rima's voice came clearly through the bond. Before he could respond, the first obstacle, a series of rapid-moving energy beams, began firing at them. The beams would disintegrate anything they touched, and Jason knew they had to move fast. Without thinking, he darted to the side, narrowly avoiding a beam that shot past him. His body moved on instinct, but his mind was completely synchronized with Rima's, their movements mirroring each other like a well-rehearsed dance. Every step they took, every decision they made, was guided by the bond between them. Jason heard Rima's voice again, this time with a sense of urgency. "We need to reach the core of the simulation. The orb, it's the key." The two of them moved swiftly, each obstacle an immediate threat that they avoided with precision. They worked together seamlessly, each anticipating the other's moves. It was as if they had done this 1,000 times before, even though Jason had never faced anything like this in his life. When they finally reached the orb, Jason's heart pounded in his chest. He wasn't sure what would happen next, but he knew one thing for certain. They were in this together. Suddenly, the orb pulsed brighter, and the entire room shifted. The walls seemed to distort, and the air around them grew thick with energy. Jason felt Rima's hand briefly graze his own, a simple gesture, but it grounded him. "We can do this," her voice echoed in his mind. Jason nodded. They had come this far, and they weren't backing down now.